Deadly Disguise. Chapter 7. In the zombie room, Jack became distracted. He and Rachel had just entered, disturbing a group of mechanical zombies feeding on a fresh victim. When the zombies rose and began to amble in their direction, Rachel shrieked in fear and delight, tugging desperately on Jack's sleeve, trying to get him out of the room before they were eaten. But when she looked at his face, he seemed a million miles away. The zombies were advancing. In a panic, Rachel shouldered Jack into the next room, just in the nick of time. Jack turned to her surprised. She was about to ask him what was wrong, but then eerie music wafted out from the room's hidden speakers. A wolf howled in the distance. As the lights came up, they found themselves in a graveyard, ankle-deep in an evil mist. "Welcome!" A deep voice with a Hungarian accent greeted them. The voice seemed to come from everywhere. "You're just in time for dinner. My dinner." The room was then filled with sinister laughter. In the center of the room, a mausoleum became visible. A plaque on its face read Dracula. The rusty gate at its entrance shook. Something was trying to get out. Finally, the lock burst into dust and the gate began to swing open. From the darkness within, one clawed hand emerged and gripped the side of the entrance. On one finger was a ring with a single ebony stone. "Care to join me in an aperitif?" the voice asked seductively. "Care to be my aperitif?" From the crypt emerged an elegantly dressed man wearing a cape. Its inner lining was a deep scarlet. The man smiled, revealing two sharp canine teeth. In anticipation of a feast, they started to drip blood. "Something's wrong," Jack said. "What's wrong?" asked Rachel, noticing the troubled look on Jack's face. Jack shook his head. "I've felt this since Vanessa arrived. Something or someone is not right here." Raising his hands menacingly into the air, Dracula started coming for them. Repeat checked his reflection as best he could in his Subaru side view mirror. From head to toe he was covered in surgical bandages. The next phase of his plan was to infiltrate the party. Dressed as a mummy, he would have free reign over the house. No one would have the slightest idea who he was. Perfect. He'd be indistinguishable from the other guests, and able to dig up plenty of dirt as he roamed the halls of Appleby Mansion. After making the face mask more secure, he grabbed the micro-cassette tape recorder from the front seat and gave himself a final once-over. "I'm Spider-Man," Repeat thought, "in costume, anonymous, and out to right wrongs. Of course, I'm more revenge-oriented than Spider-Man, so maybe I'm really the Shadow. Yes, that's it. The evil that lurks in the hearts of men. Been there, done that." A surprise blow to his back knocked Repeat forward. The recorder flew from his hands as his stomach caught the side view mirror, deflating his lungs in an instant. The mirror snapped off as Repeat crumpled to the ground. Gasping, he saw the recorder land inches from his face. Beyond it were a pair of mismatched shoes. Instinctively, Repeat reached for the recorder, but before his hand could touch it, one of the shoes smashed it viciously. Splinters of plastic bounced off Repeat's face. He withdrew his hand, dimly aware that if he had actually reached the recorder, splinters of bone from his own hand would be bouncing off his face. Groaning, Repeat rolled onto his back and looked up. Hateful eyes stared down at him. They were moving toward him now, and he saw clenched fists. Repeat could not move. It seemed his only option was to lie there and prepare to die. In order to escape Dracula, Rachel and Jack had to dodge the giant bat that flew at them. Finally, they escaped into a room featuring not just a king of the undead, but the king himself. In a bizarrely humorous break from the wanton fright and carnage of the previous rooms, this chamber contained a shrine to Elvis Presley. Before them, bloated and blue, Elvis hunched over a toilet. Pills littered the ground at his feet. There were no sounds of screaming or murder. Instead, the soundtrack played the gentle murmur of a Graceland crowd of tourists, and the constant sound of a toilet flushing. "You're a weirdo," Rachel laughed. "Ron's idea, actually," Jack told her. "He's the Elvis freak, in case you hadn't noticed." Rachel had. "So why do you keep saying something's wrong? The party's going great, except for the scene with that Vanessa, and barely anyone saw that." "That's not it," Jack replied, racking his brain. "It has nothing to do with her. It has to do with—" An idea seemed to come to him. "That caterer," he concluded uncertainly. "Maria?" Rachel wondered, remembering that the girl had never had her picture taken with Jack and Vanessa. Jack shook his head. "Not her, the guy. What's his name?" "Oh, you mean Repeat. Pete Peters." Suddenly a light bulb seemed to turn on in Jack's head. Peters, that's it. It was all very clear to him now, but Rachel was stumped. "What are you talking about?" she asked. Jack turned to her excitedly. "Do you remember back when I lived here, that something happened between my father and a former employee of his?" Rachel thought back. At 6 or 7, reading the front page of the newspaper had not been a top priority, but she did recall something. "Was there some sort of dispute over the land?" "This is what happened. This former employee of my father goes into business for himself, gets lucky with a few developments and starts to do well. But this guy doesn't really know what he's doing, so things start to go wrong. My father, who wants this guy to succeed, helps out." "Why would he want a potential competitor to succeed?" Rachel wondered aloud. "Lots of reasons. Competition is more interesting than always getting your way, which is how it was for my father back then. And he considered his employees sort of like family, so he wanted them to succeed. But there was a selfish reason, too. He felt that the failure of anyone associated with him, even if they no longer worked for him, was a reflection on himself. So for everybody's sake, my father formed partnerships with this guy, trying to take him under his wing again, give him some pointers. But the ex-employee had gotten very proud, despite the fact that he was a screw-up. He wouldn't listen to a word my dad said. When properties started failing and deals began to fall through, my father still tried to help. And he pumped a lot of money into this guy's business. The guy develops a drinking problem. Things go totally to hell, and my father buys the guy out as the only way to salvage the business." "That was Repeat's father? Pete Peters' father?" Something about the story resonated in Rachel's brain. It had been so long ago, and irrelevant to her young life, but something else had happened. "Your father was in the hospital once, I think, right?" Jack nodded gravely. "Yes. After it all came down, Mr. Peters went on a drinking binge. He told any and everyone who would listen, and by this time there weren't many, that my father was a crook and had cheated him out of his business. He blamed my father for everything. Then, with the last of his dwindling money, Mr. Peters hired a couple of goons to jump my dad, and they beat him within an inch of his life." "He did that?" Rachel was horrified. "I remember he was in the hospital, but I was never told why." "Yep, Pete Peters' dad," Jack told her. "But luckily they were the best heavies Mr. Peters' money could buy, and he didn't have much money, so the thugs didn't do a very good job. My father didn't press charges, even though he could have very easily. Still, I think it's one of the reasons my parents decided to move to L.A. when I got that part on Nut House. He figured if you're going to live in a place where you're not safe, where your neighbors will hire people to beat you up or kill you, you might as well live in Los Angeles, and at least be able to go to the beach every day." Rachel laughed. "Your father was pretty cool. I always thought so." Jack smiled sadly. "Yeah." "What's your problem?" Todd screamed when he got Van's hand off of his mouth. "Gotcha!" Van giggled like a moron. If I find some Depends in the house, I'll grab some for you." "Why aren't you upstairs?" Todd asked, out of breath and seething with anger. Embarrassment over letting his guard down put him in a sudden, foul mood. "Oh, I keep hearing everyone screaming and having a good time, and I thought I'd see if you wanted to bag the operation for now and go through the haunted mansion." "Are you nuts, Robin Hood?" Todd gasped. "We came here to steal from the rich and give to the poor, which would be us. There isn't even any alcohol, and all. You call this a party?" Yeah, but Todd," whined Van, "the haunted mansion sounds so cool. Come on, we may never get another chance to come back here." "Right," Todd told him calmly, "which is why we have to get what we can out of here now, tonight, because when this party's over, I have a feeling we're not exactly going to be on Jack Spyder's short list for invitations." "We might if we just went out there and joined the party," Van mumbled in response. Todd had had enough of Van's wussosity. "Go back upstairs and do the job you were supposed to do." Van went reluctantly. For a few minutes Todd worried that Van had ditched the plan and rejoined the festivities. That would be insubordination, which was not in the Van McBride playbook. Whining definitely was one of Van's more popular plays, but ignoring orders hadn't been until now. It was no use checking on him. Todd had finally decided. It would just be more time wasted. If Van had resumed partying, then fine. He wouldn't get any cut of whatever loot Todd carried out of the mansion. And it would be the end of their friendship. Todd's mood darkened further. In addition to everything else, he realized that he also wanted to rejoin the party. Todd glanced around the room. It seemed depressingly devoid of anything lootable. The paintings seemed the most valuable, but they were the most difficult pieces to remove from the premises. The books might be valuable, especially the old ones with the leather covers, but books were boring, even if they smelled nice. Eventually, they demanded to be read. And who needs that kind of pressure? Todd asked himself. Then his eyes traveled to the one object that seemed valuable and eminently stealable. This was a rifle mounted on the wall near the polar bear. According to the inscription, it was the very gun that had brought down the bear. Todd took it down off the wall to examine it. According to what he knew from trips to the firing range with his Uncle Bo, the gun seemed to be in working order. However, it was unloaded. Placing the rifle on the desktop, Todd searched the drawers for ammunition. Slammed to the ground, Repeat expected the white boot of the Vegas Elvis to do to his head what the blue suede shoe of the young Elvis had done to his cassette recorder. But once that little piece of spy equipment was destroyed, Ron became almost solicitous. "Hey, sorry, buddy," Ron said, a smile on his face as he helped Repeat to his feet. "I'm glad we're finally getting a chance to meet." "What are you talking about?" Repeat groaned, his back aching. "I've been looking for the tabloid mole all night," Ron explained. "Maria gave you away." Repeat groaned again. "She's been one of my local spies since I arrived. She's got an obvious thing for Jack, wants to help him, you know. She has no idea that she's just introduced me to the perfect accomplice." Repeat stared at him in silence. Slowly it dawned on him that Ron was serious. "I'll make you a deal," Ron offered. "I'll get you back into the party and help you get the photos you want. Sorry about your tape recorder, but it wouldn't do to have proof of what I was doing floating around. How about this? I'll replace the recorder, repair the broken-off car mirror, and pay you a healthy bonus on top of the tabloid pay for a good story. But the story will be the one that I write." Repeat grinned and nodded. They shook hands. "Wait 10 minutes, then come to the kitchen door," Ron instructed. "I'll make sure it's unlocked." 10 minutes later, a mummy shambled up to the kitchen entrance of the mansion. Reaching out a bandaged hand, it turned the knob. The door swung open. He lumbered into the kitchen. His authentic shambling walk was not due to any disciplined study of mummy movies, to say the least. The bruise on his back from Ron's sucker punch was making him walk funny. and the way it felt, he'd be walking this way for many days to come. Maria. Her name was a bitter echo in his head. Now that Jack was no longer the sole target of his wrath, Maria would be next. She would have to pay the price of betrayal. If not for the unfinished business here at the mansion, and the sizable bonus Ron had promised, dealing with her would have been Repeat's first choice. But she would get hers soon enough. Right now it was Jack's turn, and eventually Ron and Vanessa would be undone as well, because Ron had made a couple serious mistakes. One, the sneak attack had been unnecessary, and unnecessarily rough. Had Ron just confronted them, they could have come to an agreement without any use of force. And two, Ron had destroyed the recorder, but not the cassette tape, containing him and Vanessa scheming. Repeat had changed tapes before donning his costume. The tape and the recorder at the time had been blank, and the incriminating tape was safely locked in the Subaru's glove compartment. And when it came out, that would be the end of Ron's little scheme. These Hollywood types with their arrogance, they made him sick. Fade to black on Ron, as they said in movie scripts. Fade to black on them all, Repeat thought sinisterly. That's when the kitchen went black, all at once. Chapter 8. Elvis winked out of existence. At the same moment, the artificial Graceland crowds fell silent. Other voices, however, real voices, were heard mumbling in confusion and amusement at the blackout. "I was afraid of this," Jack huffed angrily. "I wanted to hire a company that wires big amusement parks, but Ron talked me into going local. Idiot me. I thought helping out local business might be a nice gesture." "It was," Rachel encouraged him. She felt a bit nervous, but not only because of the darkness. Jack just seemed so agitated. "But they obviously can't handle stuff like this," he said. She couldn't see him, but from the sound of his voice she could tell he was pacing. "Stand still," Rachel told him, reaching out a hand. She caught his arm. "And calm down." He stopped, but she could hear his rapid, heavy breathing. "We should get out of here and make sure everyone's all right." Suddenly, the room felt absolutely silent. If she hadn't been touching him, she would have thought Jack had disappeared. When he finally sighed heavily, Rachel realized that he had caught his breath. "Right," he said with resignation. Yeah, let's go. Let's get going before someone gets hurt and sues the hell out of me. That's all I would..." Rachel heard Jack's foot kick something solid. Then there was a large crash as he fell to the ground. The room fell silent again. "Jack," she cried, standing still. "Are you all right?" There was no answer. She started forward again, then stopped herself. If Jack had tripped on something, she might as well. Lowering herself to a crouch, she reached her hands along the floor in front of her. "Jack!" she said loudly. Still no answer, and no sound of his breathing either. "Can you hear me? Jack!" Just then Rachel's hand brushed up against some fabric. A cape. She had found Jack's cape. And underneath it, as if covered by a burial shroud, was Jack. Next to him, the floor rose about 3 inches. Apparently Jack had tripped there. His body felt warm, but at first Rachel couldn't find his heartbeat. Then she realized that his costume was too thick. She found his neck and a pulse, albeit a weak one. "Jack," she said gently. Once more she touched his face. The skin was clammy, almost slick with sweat. The slickness continued up to his head. Something was very wrong, but it was too dark to see. Then she remembered the safety lights of her costume. Finding the switch, she turned them on. In the dim lights, it appeared that someone had poured black paint over Jack's face. Then Rachel noticed the same stuff on her hands. She rubbed 2 fingers together. It was the same slick feeling. This was not sweat, nor was it paint, she realized, with a surge of panic. "Jack!" she cried, leaning forward so the light was directly in his face. There, the substance showed the faintest trace of red. Blood. Jack had struck his head and was bleeding. Badly. Rachel rose quickly. "Help!" she cried, rushing toward the door. "Jack's hurt! Somebody help!" Then her foot caught on Jack's splayed leg, and she went down herself, screaming. Ron Marchant started for the basement steps. He had stayed down there too long. Time to start helping people out of the house. As much as he didn't want to. It was important that he be witnessed assisting others. That way, in case of any other casualties, oh, and there will be other casualties, he told himself, he would avoid blame. He clicked on the flashlight he had hidden next to the circuit breakers. It illuminated the stairs that led to the kitchen above. Hot properties, these flashlights, he said to himself, out loud. Then he whispered in a little sing-song, "The party's over." "Yes, it is," snarled an unexpected voice coming down the stairs. Ron was just able to shine the flashlight on the figure when it was knocked from his hand. He caught a glimpse of bandages and a knife. Damn, Todd thought. The party's over, and I didn't find a damn cool thing. Except this gun, of course. He sighed. There was no use in searching through the dark. No doubt everybody would be leaving the party now, so he and Van had to make their move immediately. It wouldn't do to be stuck in this place after hours. Todd just hoped that Van had the sense to get out while the getting was good. An early end to the party had not been among their contingencies. Looking out the window, Todd could see a steady stream of guests heading for their cars. He noticed how the power outage seemed confined to the house. Old Jacko's finally blown a fuse then, he mused. This caused Todd to smile, despite his disappointment in the paucity of the night's take. If I could get away with carting off that polar bear, I'd do it, he thought. Enough light came in from outside to make the polar bear appear to glow. He raised the rifle and sighted the bear. "Pow!" he said, pretending to squeeze the trigger. "Right between the eyes." Then the door to the study creaked open again. This time Todd did not spin around frantically. Instead, he ignored it and pretended to shoot the bear one more time. "I know you're there, Van, old buddy, old pal," he thought. "You're not going to catch me again. Maybe this time I have a scare for you." He could feel the presence in the room. No doubt Van was lurking, probably only a few steps behind Todd. A good magician only does a trick once, Todd's father used to say. But Van wasn't a good magician or mathematician or any kind of atician. He was only a sort of idiot savant burglar. "Ha!" Todd yelled and spun around, the gun at the ready. He pulled the trigger, but since it was unloaded, there was only a click. Even that would have been enough to unloose the most watertight of bladders. Had anyone been in the rifle's sights? Van was not there. The room was empty. Todd had just psyched himself out. Feeling foolish, he turned back to the polar bear. "Don't tell anyone, okay?" he confided. "But it appears I'm a wuss." Amazingly, the bear seemed to nod in agreement. "What the?" he said, approaching the polar bear. Looking up, he saw the bear continuing to nod. Then he realized it wasn't nodding at all, but rocking, back and forth. Then the rocking movement became more pronounced. Todd tried to peer around the bear, but its bulk obscured whoever was behind it. Because certainly someone must be behind the bear. How could it move otherwise? "Van, quit it, man, you moron!" He moved closer, despite the now violent rocking. "You're gonna knock the thing over." No answer. "And in case you're wondering, I'm not a wuss, you wuss." Todd looked down between the legs of the bear. As he did, the bear, with the groan of a redwood being felled, toppled forward. Todd looked up just in time to see the toothy mouth of a 12-foot polar bear zooming in on his face. He knew he should have jumped aside, but his instinct was to flee. He turned tail and ran like a scared rabbit. Or at least he meant to run. But his feet got caught up in the molasses of his own panic, and the bear slammed down mightily on top of him. As Todd hit the ground, the bear's teeth dug into the back of his neck. and the claws ripped through his arms, staking them to the ground. As the life drained from him, Todd remembered a childhood conversation he'd shared with his father. "You mean there's no Santa Claus?" little Todd had asked after his crying had subsided. "What happened to him?" "The polar bears got him," his father had said gruffly, "and ate the elves like they were popcorn." Rachel carefully edged her way out of the guillotine room. When she had tripped over Jack, she had come only inches from branding herself on the door. So she steadied her breathing, stood carefully, and shifted herself into slow motion. Jack was hurt, but it wouldn't help him if she went too fast and incapacitated herself in the process. As a result, it took her some time to navigate her way across the room, even with her safety lights on. Occasionally she called out for help, but gave up after getting no response. Others must be leaving, and on a night like tonight, even with the lights out, cries of terror were just part of the scenery. Rachel didn't see a soul until she reached the top of the ballroom stairway. Light from the outside illuminated a motley crowd heading for the exits. Security staff with flashlights guided people out of the mansion. Rachel flew down the stairs and ran for the first people she saw. "Doug, Laura, you gotta help Jack." The benevolent Bonnie and Clyde turned to her. "What's wrong?" Laura asked, instantly alarmed. "Jack and I were in one of the rooms," she said breathlessly, "and when we tried to leave, he tripped and fell and hit his head. He's bleeding badly." Rachel began to cry. "I would have gotten down sooner, but it was so dark. I was afraid of falling. He's bleeding. He needs help." "Slow down," Doug said, grasping her shoulder to steady her. "Which room?" "The Elvis room." "I'll be right back," he said to Laura. Laura nodded, and he pushed his way through the crowd toward the exit. "It'll be all right," Laura said. Rachel wiped her tears and tried to pull herself together. Doug returned with the flashlight. "Okay, one of the security guards is calling an ambulance." "But we're so far from town," Rachel pointed out. "Right, so we're going to go up there ourselves right now. Let's go." They retraced Rachel's steps back to the Elvis room. The light made the going easier, but without full illumination they still couldn't race. Finally, they reached the Elvis room. And it was empty. "See?" Rachel said, pointing to a dark spot on the floor. "He was lying there. That's his blood." Without hesitation, Doug stooped down and put his fingers to the stain. "It sure ain't motor oil," he said gravely. "He must have wandered off. We have to find him." Rachel's voice was rising again. "He didn't go toward the ballroom," Laura said, "or we would have seen him, unless he knows some secret passageways in this place. In a place this big, I wouldn't be surprised." "I don't think so. Look," Doug said, pointing with the flashlight. Droplets of blood traced a path to the next room. Rachel darted forward. "Hurry! He's hurt badly!" Throwing the door open, she peered into the blackness beyond. "Bring that flashlight, Doug!" Doug appeared beside her and shined the light into the room. Empty. The blood drops stopped halfway across the room. "Check the display," Rachel told them. As Doug turned his flashlight toward the platform, Laura began sniffing the air. "Do you guys smell something?" she asked. Before either Doug or Rachel had a chance to answer, the flashlight beam fell upon a pair of shoes on the platform. All three pairs of eyes watched as Doug swept the flashlight beam up to illuminate the figure standing there. "Jack!" Doug called out tentatively. But at the sight of the charred red and green sweater, they knew it wasn't Jack. "No!" said Laura. All three froze in place. Before them, his burned face snarling with rage, a lethal claw raised in the air ready to strike, stood none other than Freddy Krueger. Chapter 9. Van McBride felt like Anti-Claus, that is, the opposite of Santa Claus. Whistling a holiday tune like a funeral dirge, he walked through the halls with a pillowcase slung over his shoulder. It was full of goodies he had plundered from the mansion. This party seemed like more fun than either Van or Todd had seen in a long while, but that apparently didn't matter to Todd, who had been, as usual, pretty mean, and made Van get back to work. On his way back upstairs, Van had considered ditching Todd. Ever since Scrag had died, Todd had gotten a really big head. He was trying to be Scrag, and in Van's silent opinion, Todd had only a shade of their former mentor's criminal genius. "Of course I'm no Professor Moriarty," Van admitted to himself, remembering Sherlock Holmes' nemesis. "But at least I know that I know everything about myself." Todd was trying to be something he was not, and this play-acting was getting tired, especially since it always turned out that Todd got all the good loot while Van got almost nothing. Todd was right about one thing, though. This mansion was a gold mine. So Van returned to pillaging, resisting the urge to run off and join the party every time he heard a scream or shout that indicated that people were having fun elsewhere in the mansion. Finally, he became immune to the sounds and found a treasure trove of jewelry in a room that must have belonged to Jack's mother. The sack on his shoulders swelled to the limit with earrings, necklaces, and other assorted precious baubles. It was near the end of the hallway that he noticed the silence. The cheerful screams had ceased. For some reason, the fun had stopped. Then came the sound of car engines starting. Rushing to the nearest front room, Van saw what was happening, but at first couldn't understand why. Clearly the party had ended, and, by the looks of it, all at once. He and Todd had to get out of here, and fast. One step into the hallway, he realized his dilemma. He had a pillowcase full of stolen items, and getting it out of the house would now be a problem. He certainly couldn't go walking out the front door with it, but he couldn't leave it behind either. That would make tonight a total failure. No fun and no loot. In a moment of inspiration, Van spun around and ran to the end of the hallway. The flashlight beam revealed exactly what he expected to find, a small door about 4 feet off the floor. In some old movie, he couldn't recall exactly which one, there had been a large mansion just like this one. There had been a dumbwaiter to transport food between the kitchen and the dining room above. Van pulled open the little door now, and sure enough, he found his dumbwaiter. It looked to be just the right size to take his pillowcase full of goodies downstairs for him so he wouldn't have to walk through the house with it. Inside the dumbwaiter was a small panel with 2 buttons, one marked up and the other down. Van pressed the up button to call the dumbwaiter. Nothing happened. Pressing it another few times to no avail, he almost thought he was sunk. At least he finally understood why everyone was leaving the party. The power was out. Then he noticed the pulley cords for the dumbwaiter. Well, no reason why it shouldn't work manually, he reasoned. He gave one of the cords a sharp tug. Nothing. But he might be pulling in the wrong direction, so he tried again. It gave a little. Grunting, he pulled harder. It gave more. He shone the flashlight down the shaft. Following the cords, he spied what appeared to be the top of the dumbwaiter. He gave the rope another sharp pull, then looked down the shaft again. The dumbwaiter had moved closer. It would take some effort, but his plan would succeed. About the time he figured the dumbwaiter was halfway to him, a lone scream echoed from some other part of the mansion. The sound of it gave him a chill. Van turned sharply. That wasn't a happy scream, he thought. Someone had just had a major scare. Then another sound struck him. It was a squeak as the pulleys of the dumbwaiter began turning of their own accord. The dumbwaiter was moving downward. Instinctively, Van reached in and grabbed the ropes to stop the dumbwaiter. They fought him a little, but the pulleys stopped turning. Was someone down there, he wondered, or had the pulleys just turned on their own to undo his efforts? The only person he could imagine being on the other end of the dumbwaiter was Todd, and he wasn't the type to fool around. Nah, that's not Todd's style, Van concluded. Must be my old arch-enemy gravity causing problems. So he reached into the shaft once more and pulled on the ropes. The dumbwaiter came easily for a few feet, then hitched. Van gave it some play, then pulled again. He encountered the same resistance, but each time he made more headway. He was reminded of fishing, letting it run, then reeling it in a little, and letting it run, reeling it in, until he finally landed the dumbwaiter. "You little bugger," Van scolded the dumbwaiter. "I ought to fillet you." As he loaded the pillowcase of jewelry into the dumbwaiter and secured its contents, Van relaxed again. Oh, the anti-clause was back in business. Then the dumbwaiter dropped suddenly. It fell so quickly that Van had no time to pull out his hands, and in an instant his forearms were trapped. Van felt the crushing pressure and heard a scream, his own. It was getting worse. He was trapped. It wasn't gravity that had made the dumbwaiter fall. Someone had pulled it down and was still pulling. Soon more than Van's circulation would be cut off. His hands were already numb. Despite the pain, Van resisted calling out again. Drawing attention to himself would only get him caught with the goods. Besides, he still held out hope that this was one of Todd's particularly cruel jokes. Perhaps his suggestion to call off the burglary had upset Todd more than it had seemed at the time. Whatever the case, if it was Todd, their day as a team were over. I may be dumb, but I'm not an idiot, Van thought, stifling a shout of pain. I don't have to take this kind of abuse. Just then the dumbwaiter took a breather. It didn't let up entirely. Van's arms were still tightly wedged, but the intense downward pressure eased. Then, just as suddenly, the pressure increased again, and this time Van was certain his arms were going to be severed. A cry of pain escaped his lips. "Stop that!" he shouted. And it did stop. His hands were now quite numb, and he was quite stuck. But the dumbwaiter stopped moving. Now, maybe if he could think through the pain, he could find a way to extricate himself. Instead, another thought pierced through the red veil of agony. The significance of the last burst of pressure from the dumbwaiter hit him. That was the feeling of the dumbwaiter being wedged in place. This would allow whoever was responsible to leave it. But to do what? Was he about to get caught stealing? "Help!" he yelled, shocked by the sound of his own voice after so much silence. And to hell with being caught. If he didn't get his arms out soon, they'd probably have to be amputated. The mansion seemed just to swallow up his voice. He couldn't see how anyone could hear him, but he had to try. "Help me! I'm stuck here!" As his voice died away, Van thought he heard the sound of footsteps in the distance behind him. He fell silent, craning his neck to hear better. But the sounds stopped. Maybe he had heard nothing. The impeded circulation in his arms was making him dizzy. He felt sick. He leaned in closer to the dumbwaiter. "Help!" he shouted down the shaft. The dumbwaiter itself absorbed much of the sound, but much of it reverberated down the shaft. This success cut through his thickening haze and gave him hope. He leaned down again. "Up here! Anyone! I'm up here and I need help!"
"Quit shouting! I'm here!"
came a sudden voice behind him. Van was so surprised and pleased, he tried to turn quickly to see his savior, and only succeeded in nearly ripping his arms from their sockets. "Ow!" he cried. Then gingerly craning his neck again, he tried to look behind him. It was too dark to see who it was. "Thanks!" he started to blubber, already trying to figure out how to explain the situation. "I'm kinda stuck here and—"
"Try and steal from Jack Spyder, will you?"
Van heard the voice say, suddenly angry. Uh-oh, Van thought. I'm sunk. His mind raced. If it means getting out of this jam, then fine, I'll admit to it all. I'll even turn in Todd. It just hurts so much. "Okay, I admit," he began, but was interrupted again.
"Shut up!"
the voice commanded. The last words Van would hear. In the next moment, a plastic bag was brought down over Van's head. There was a ripping sound, and tape started winding around Van's neck, securing the bag over his head. Van panicked and inhaled sharply, preparing to scream, but the thin film clung to his nostrils. He choked instantly and coughed it back out. but the air was quickly becoming very still inside. Instinctively, he tried to reach for his face to rip the bag away, but his arms were still wedged in the dumbwaiter. The reflex caused him to bang his forehead against the wall in front of him, dazing him. Spikes of pain shot through his arms, up to his shoulders. The pain only served to cut through the fog that was gathering around his mind as he suffocated. It made him more aware of what was happening, and what was about to happen. The knowledge nearly drove him crazy, and in frustration, he began to purposely bang his head against the wall. "If only I knew Morse code," he thought, "then I could bang out SOS. I know it's simple. I just can't remember it right now. But even if I did know, would anyone else know that it was Morse code? Or that it was an SOS? And even if they did know, by the time they got here, I'd probably have brain damage just from pounding it out. Todd would say, I already have brain damage." The thought made Van chuckle weakly, using the last of his air. His head fell forward and struck the wall one last time.
"It's all right," Doug shouted. "It's just a robot."
Laura didn't seem to hear and continued clawing at the door to escape. At the sight of the lifelike robot, she had screamed hysterically and tried to run. But in her panic, she couldn't seem to open the door. Doug ran to her and wrapped his arms around her.
"It's all right, Laura,"
he said firmly. She continued to struggle in his arms. Tears flowed down her cheeks. Rachel looked in astonishment at Laura and then at the robot. It was a frightening sight, but Laura seemed almost unhinged. "We have to get out of here," Laura cried. Then, looking fiercely into Doug's eyes, she whispered hoarsely, "We have to get out of here right now."
"It's okay,"
Doug said softly. Then he turned to Rachel.
"I'm sorry. We have to go."
"What about Jack?" Rachel demanded. "He may be hurt." "We have to leave," Laura told her, a wild look in her eyes. "You should leave too."
"Jack will be all right," Doug said. "He's probably downstairs looking for you. Besides, the ambulance will be here soon enough. Why don't you come with us?"
"I'm not leaving until I find out what's happened to Jack," Rachel said, her voice quivering. Something had happened, and her friends were abandoning her, and abandoning Jack as well.
"Okay," Doug told her. Clearly he knew what Rachel was thinking, but his priority had to be getting Laura out of there. "But will you please walk us out to the car? I won't feel right just leaving you here in front of this."
He nodded his head toward the Freddy Krueger robot. "Okay, but let's hurry," she told him as they started back. "I want to help the paramedics find Jack." Down at the car, Laura pleaded one last time for Rachel to leave with them. "Something's wrong in there. I can feel it, Rachel. I felt it before." Doug also tried to persuade Rachel.
"Look, even the security guards have left. You shouldn't be here alone."
Rachel looked around. Indeed, the lawn, which had served as the parking lot, was empty, save for Rachel's car and two others. Rachel shook her head. "I know you have to go," she told them, "but I have to stay. Somebody's here." She pointed to the third floor of the mansion, where a yellow glow flickered through a window. For a moment, the light was eclipsed by a silhouette. Someone was looking out at them. Then that someone was gone, and moments later the light was gone as well. "There, see?" Rachel said. "That might be Jack. I'd better go in and see."
"Call us later and let us know how it all shook out, okay?"
Doug said reluctantly. He opened the passenger door and Laura got in.
"Apologize to Jack for us, would you?"
Doug seemed truly distressed at their flight. "You got it," Rachel assured him. Doug closed the door and walked around to the other side of the car. As he got in and started the engine, Laura rolled down her window. "Be careful, okay?" she asked, her eyes haunted. Before Rachel could reply, Doug drove off. She watched the headlights disappear, then turned back to the mansion, holding the flashlight Doug had given her. Walking toward the house, she thought of Jack and panicked. What if the house should somehow disappear, taking Jack with it? Rachel broke into a run. She reached the front door and took one step into the house. It was as quiet as a grave. Now every instinct she had told her to turn, to get in her car and catch up with Doug and Laura, because she suddenly became quite certain that she was the only human being left alive in the entire place. "No," she said out loud to give herself courage. "Jack's in there," she thought, taking another step forward. But something was wrong. Laura had been right. Not out at the car, but upstairs. She had smelled something, but in the excitement they had all forgotten about it. Now the odor was stronger. The heavy scent of rotten eggs assaulted Rachel's nostrils. Moving deeper into the house, it only got worse, and she started to choke. Now it became imperative that she find Jack, because the mansion was slowly filling with gas. Okay, Slashaholics, this has been chapters 7, 8, and 9 of David Bergantino's Freddy Krueger's Tales of Terror, Deadly Disguise. Alright guys, poor Van and poor Todd. Two guys can't catch a break while robbing a place anymore, right? One guy gets mauled to death by a dead bear, the other one gets trapped in the dumbwaiter, his arms do at least, and he gets suffocated from behind. I mean, come on, right? I was actually enjoying those two guys, even though they were kind of goofs. But, yeah, so who do you guys think is the one that's possessed by Freddy doing these murders? I've got my own suspicions, but I'm not going to read ahead. I'm going to be surprised just like you whenever I narrate the conclusion of this book. This book is one of the shortest in the series, and the next upload I do of this book will be the conclusion of this book. So, looks like in the next upload we're going to be finding out who the killer is. But I want to hear from you guys ahead of time what your guesses are. So please, in the comment section below, let me know who you think is the one possessed by Freddy that's doing the killings here in this book. I gotta say, I'm enjoying where the plot's going. It's been a very fast-moving book, and I actually appreciate that. A lot of books have too much filler, and this one is this party, and it's getting straight to the point, straight to the punch. I'm enjoying it. I love the whodunit aspect, the whole mysterious thing. Different people scheming and everything. Now Jack's disappeared, so he's a suspect. He was not a suspect of mine until he's disappeared. Now it's just weird that he's not around. So yeah, guys, let me know what you think of this book so far, who you think the killer is, and I'll be back very soon with the conclusion of Freddy Krueger's Tales of Terror, Deadly Disguise by David Bergantino. Until then, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, thanks for visiting the library, thanks for listening, and pleasant screams!